The December wind howled through the cracks in the barn like a desperate wolf, and Tucker Quinn knew that no living thing should be out in weather like this without shelter, or they would surely perish before dawn broke over the Wyoming mountains. He had been tending to his horses in the warmth of the lower barn when he heard it, a soft thump from above that did not belong among the familiar creaking of old wood and the shuffling of restless animals. Tucker climbed the ladder to the loft with his lantern held high, expecting to find a raccoon or perhaps a stray cat seeking refuge from the blizzard that had descended upon South Pass City with merciless fury. What he found instead made his heart slam against his ribs with such force that he nearly dropped the lantern into the hay below. A woman lay crumpled against the far wall of the loft, her wedding dress torn and stained with mud and blood, her lips blue as forget-me-nots, her skin pale as death itself. Ice crystals clung to her dark hair, and her delicate hands were folded against her chest as if in prayer. For a terrible moment, Tucker thought she was dead, but then he saw the faint rise and fall of her chest, the barely perceptible cloud of breath that escaped her parted lips. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, setting down the lantern and rushing to her side. He pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her trembling body, feeling the deathly cold that radiated from her like she had become winter itself. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. Tucker scooped her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile, and carried her down the ladder with the practiced ease of a man who had spent 30 years of his life doing hard physical labor. The ranch house was warm. Thank God for that small mercy. Tucker had stoked the fire before heading out to check on the animals, and now flames danced cheerfully in the stone fireplace, casting orange light across the simple but comfortable main room. He laid the woman on the thick rug before the hearth and quickly set about building up the fire until it roared with heat. Her hands were the worst. He could see that immediately. Her fingers were white and waxy, and when he carefully peeled off her ruined silk gloves, he saw that her fingertips had begun to turn black at the edges. Tucker had seen frostbite before, had lost 2 toes to it himself during a particularly brutal winter when he was just a boy. He knew that warming frozen flesh too quickly could cause more damage, but he also knew that doing nothing would certainly mean losing those delicate fingers. He filled a basin with lukewarm water from the kettle that always sat near the fire, testing the temperature with his elbow the way his mother had taught him decades ago. Then he gently lowered the woman's hands into the water, holding them steady as her body began to convulse with shivers so violent that her teeth chattered loud enough to hear across the room. "Easy now," Tucker murmured, though he doubted she could hear him. "You are safe now. I have got you." He kept one hand on her wrists, to keep her hands submerged while using the other to pile every blanket he owned onto her body. The wedding dress beneath was soaked through, and Tucker knew he should remove it, but propriety held him back even as practicality screamed at him to do what needed to be done. Instead, he tucked the blankets tightly around her and continued to monitor the water temperature, gradually adding warmer water from the kettle as the minutes ticked by. It was nearly an hour before her eyes finally opened. They were green, Tucker noticed, the color of new grass in spring, and they were filled with confusion and pain and something else that he could not quite identify. Fear, perhaps, or grief, or both. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice cracked and raw. "My ranch about 2 miles outside of South Pass City," Tucker replied, keeping his voice soft and steady. "I found you in my barn loft, half frozen. How long were you out there?" The woman tried to sit up, but her body would not cooperate. She fell back against the bundled blankets with a small cry of frustration. "I do not know. Hours, maybe. It was still light when I—" She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears that spilled down her pale cheeks. Tucker carefully lifted her hands from the water and wrapped them in soft flannel cloths that he warmed by the fire. "When you what?" "When I ran," she finished. And there was such desolation in those two words that Tucker felt his chest tighten with sympathy. He did not press her further, though questions burned in his mind like the fire that crackled between them. Who was she? Where had she come from? And most importantly, who or what had driven a woman in a wedding dress out into a killing blizzard? Tucker had lived in Wyoming for most of his 32 years, and he knew that desperation was the only thing that could make a person risk their life in weather like this. "What is your name?" he asked instead, settling himself on the floor beside her so that he could continue tending to her hands. "Catherine," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "Catherine Graves." "Tucker Quinn," he said, nodding toward her in greeting. "You picked a hell of a night to be out wandering, Miss Graves." "Mrs. Graves," she corrected automatically, then her face crumpled. "Or I suppose I would have been, if I had not run." Understanding dawned on Tucker like a lantern being lit in a dark room. She was a runaway bride. That explained the dress, the desperate flight into the storm, the terror that still lingered in her eyes even as warmth began to return to her frozen limbs. "You ran from your own wedding?" Tucker asked, trying to keep judgment from his voice. He knew there were 100 reasons a woman might flee from a marriage, and most of them were damn good ones. Catherine nodded, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Robert Mallory. He is a cattleman from Cheyenne, wealthy and respected, and my father arranged the marriage without asking me what I wanted. I did not know until 2 weeks ago that the man I was meant to marry was a monster." Tucker stilled, his hands pausing in their gentle ministration of her fingers. "Did he hurt you?" "Not yet," Catherine whispered. "But I overheard him talking to his men the night before the wedding. He was drunk and bragging about what he planned to do once I was his wife, how he would break me like he broke his horses, how he would teach me to obey." Her voice broke on the last word, and Tucker had to fight down a surge of protective anger that surprised him with its intensity. "You did the right thing," he said firmly, meeting her eyes so she could see that he meant it. "A man who talks like that does not deserve a wife. He does not deserve any woman's time or attention." Catherine studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he was sincere or simply telling her what she wanted to hear. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because her shoulders relaxed slightly beneath the mound of blankets. "They will be looking for me," she said quietly. "Robert will not take this insult lightly, and my father will be furious. I have shamed them both." Tucker shook his head. "You have saved yourself. That is nothing to be ashamed of." He carefully unwrapped her hands and examined them in the firelight. The color was returning, though he knew she would be in considerable pain once the feeling came back fully. "Can you tell me where you were when you ran?" "How did you end up at my ranch?" Catherine closed her eyes, clearly trying to piece together fragmented memories. "The ceremony was at the church in South Pass City. I waited until Robert was distracted, talking to the guests, and I just ran out the side door. I did not have a plan. I just knew I could not go through with it. The storm came up so fast and I got turned around in the snow. I saw your barn and thought I could hide there until morning, but I must have passed out from the cold." "You are lucky to be alive," Tucker said bluntly. "Another hour in that loft and you would have frozen to death." "Maybe that would have been better," Catherine murmured, so softly that Tucker almost missed it. "No," he said sharply, startling them both with his vehemence. "Do not say that, do not even think it. You are alive, and that means you have a chance to build a life on your own terms. Dead is just dead." Catherine looked at him with those impossibly green eyes, and Tucker felt something shift in his chest, some locked door creaking open after years of being bolted shut. He had been alone for a long time, by choice and circumstance both. After his fiancée had died of fever 7 years ago, Tucker had thrown himself into building his ranch, into the hard physical work that left him too exhausted to dream. He had convinced himself that he was content with solitude, that he did not need companionship or love or any of the complications that came with opening your heart to another person. But looking at Catherine now, fragile and brave and beautiful despite her ordeal, he felt the first stirrings of something he had thought long dead. "You should rest," Tucker said, pushing those thoughts aside. There would be time enough to examine his feelings later, assuming Catherine survived the night without complications from the frostbite. "Your body has been through a terrible shock. Sleep will help." "I cannot," Catherine protested, even as her eyes drooped with exhaustion. "They will come looking. I need to leave before I bring trouble to your door." "You are not going anywhere tonight," Tucker said firmly. "That storm is still raging, and even if it was not, you can barely move. You will stay here where it is warm and safe, and we will figure out what to do in the morning." Catherine opened her mouth as if to argue, but another violent shiver racked her body, and she subsided back into the blankets with a defeated sound. Tucker stood and went to his small kitchen, returning with a mug of hot broth that he had made from beef bones and vegetables. He helped Catherine sit up enough to drink, supporting her with one arm while holding the mug to her lips with his other hand. She drank slowly, grimacing at first but then taking larger sips as the warmth of the liquid spread through her body. Tucker watched the color continue to return to her cheeks, watched her breathing become deeper and more regular, and felt a fierce satisfaction that he had found her in time. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Catherine asked suddenly, her eyes searching his face. "You do not know me. I could be anyone. I could be lying about everything." Tucker considered the question seriously. "I suppose you could be," he admitted, "but I do not think you are. I have always been pretty good at reading people, and you have got the look of someone telling the truth. Besides, even if you were lying, I could not very well leave you to freeze to death in my barn. That would weigh heavy on my conscience." A ghost of a smile touched Catherine's lips, the first he had seen from her. "You are a good man, Tucker Quinn." "I am just a man," Tucker replied with a shrug. "No better or worse than most, but I try to do right when I can." He helped Catherine lie back down and added another log to the fire. The wind outside had not abated, and snow continued to pile against the windows in great drifts. Tucker knew from experience that storms like this could last for days, which meant Catherine would be staying with him for at least the immediate future, whether either of them liked it or not. The thought should have concerned him more than it did, given the potential for scandal and the danger posed by angry men searching for a runaway bride. But Tucker found he did not care much about propriety or danger when weighed against Catherine's safety. "You should sleep too," Catherine said, her voice already thick with approaching unconsciousness. "You must be exhausted." Tucker nodded, though he doubted he would sleep much. His mind was too full of plans and contingencies, too aware of the woman lying by his fire, too unsettled by the feelings she had stirred up in him. "I will rest in a bit. I want to make sure the fire stays strong through the night." Catherine's eyes closed, and within moments her breathing had evened out into the deep rhythm of sleep. Tucker sat in his worn armchair and watched her in the firelight, this unexpected guest who had quite literally fallen into his life. She was beautiful. He could not deny that, with her delicate features and that mass of dark hair spread across his blankets like spilled ink. But it was more than beauty that drew him. There was strength in her, too, the kind of quiet courage it took to choose the unknown terror of a blizzard over the known terror of a cruel husband. Tucker must have dozed off at some point, because he woke with a start to find pale morning light filtering through the windows, and the fire burned down to embers. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a world transformed into white silence. Tucker quickly rebuilt the fire and then checked on Catherine, relieved to find her still sleeping peacefully. Her hands were curled against her chest, and he carefully examined them in the growing light. The color was good. The black at the edges of her fingertips had not spread, and when he gently pressed on her fingers, he could see that blood was flowing properly. She would keep all her fingers, though she would be in pain for several days as the nerves recovered from their freezing. Tucker was in the kitchen making breakfast when he heard horses approaching. His whole body tensed, and he quickly moved to the window, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that hung above the door. 3 men on horseback were making their way up the snow-covered track to his house, and even from a distance, Tucker could see the grim determination on their faces. Catherine had woken at the sound of the horses, and Tucker turned to find her struggling to sit up, panic written clearly across her face. "Is it them?" she asked, her voice trembling. Tucker moved to her side and helped her to her feet, though she swayed alarmingly and had to grip his arm for support. "I do not know, but we will find out soon enough. Can you walk?" "I think so," Catherine said, though her steps were unsteady as Tucker guided her toward his bedroom. "What are you going to do?" "I am going to send them on their way," Tucker said with more confidence than he felt. "Get in bed and stay quiet. If they ask, I have not seen anyone." Catherine caught his hand, her green eyes pleading. "Do not let them take me back, Tucker, please." "I will not," Tucker promised, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. He settled Catherine in his bed and closed the door before returning to the main room just as a heavy fist pounded on the front door. Tucker took a breath to steady himself and opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air and 3 men who looked like they meant business. The leader was a tall man in his 40s with cruel eyes and a thin mouth set in a hard line. Tucker pegged him immediately as Robert Mallory, the groom Catherine had fled from. The other 2 men were clearly hired hands, muscle meant to intimidate. "Morning," Tucker said evenly, blocking the doorway with his body. "Can I help you gentlemen?" "Robert Mallory," the leader said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I am looking for my fiancée. She ran from our wedding yesterday during the storm, and we tracked her footprints to your property before we lost them." Tucker kept his face carefully neutral. "Sorry to hear that, but I have not seen anyone. Been holed up here since the storm hit." Mallory's eyes narrowed, and he tried to peer past Tucker into the warm interior of the house. "You mind if we take a look around, just to be sure? Catherine is not well, you understand. She gets confused sometimes, says things that are not true. Her father and I are very worried about her." The implication was clear, and Tucker felt his temper rise. Mallory was trying to paint Catherine as mentally unstable, laying the groundwork to dismiss anything she might say about him. It was a tactic Tucker had seen before, used by men who wanted to control women without anyone questioning their methods. "I do mind, actually," Tucker said, his voice hardening. "This is my property, and I have got no reason to let strangers search it. Like I said, I have not seen anyone." "Your fiancé must have gone a different direction." One of the hired hands stepped forward, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "Now see here, we have got a right. You have got no rights on my land," Tucker interrupted, his own hand moving toward his rifle with deliberate slowness. "And I suggest you remember that before you do something we will all regret." Mallory held up a hand, stopping his man from escalating the situation further. His eyes were cold as he studied Tucker, clearly trying to decide whether this lone rancher was worth the trouble. "If you are hiding her," Mallory said softly, "I will find out, And when I do, I will make sure you regret interfering in my affairs." "Noted," Tucker said flatly. "Now get off my property before I forget my manners." For a tense moment, the three men stood their ground, and Tucker thought he might actually have to reach for his rifle. But then Mallory nodded curtly and turned away, his men following. Tucker watched them mount their horses and ride back down the track, not relaxing until they had disappeared from view. He closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. That had been close, too close, and Tucker knew it was only a matter of time before Mallory came back with more men or a sheriff who was in his pocket. Tucker needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Catherine emerged from the bedroom, her face white as the snow outside. "He will not give up," she said quietly. "Robert never gives up when he wants something, and right now he wants me. Not because he loves me, but because I made him look foolish. He will tear this territory apart before he lets that insult stand." Tucker moved to her side and guided her back to the fire, settling her in his armchair with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "Then we need to make sure he cannot find you. How far away is your family?" "My father is in Rock Springs," Catherine said. "He owns a mercantile there." "He will side with Robert, though. My father cares more about business connections than he does about my happiness or safety." "What about other family? Friends? Anyone who might help you?" Catherine shook her head, despair evident in every line of her body. "My mother died when I was young. I have no siblings, and my friends—" She laughed bitterly. "Most of them were only friends because of my father's position in society. Once they learn I ran from my wedding, they will cut me off faster than you can blink." Tucker crouched down in front of her, taking her damaged hands carefully in his own. "Listen to me, Catherine. You are not alone in this. I know we just met, and you have got no reason to trust me beyond what I have already done, but I am telling you right now that I will help you. We will figure something out." "Why?" Catherine asked, echoing her question from the night before. "Why would you risk your safety, your home, your whole life for a stranger?" Tucker looked into her green eyes and saw himself reflected there, saw the hope and fear warring in their depths, and knew that his answer mattered more than almost anything he had ever said. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I've got a feeling about you, Catherine Graves. A feeling that maybe you stumbled into my barn for a reason." Catherine studied his face for a long moment, and then, slowly, she smiled. It was a real smile this time, not the ghost of one from the night before, and it transformed her face from merely beautiful to absolutely radiant. "A feeling?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice despite their dire circumstances. Tucker felt heat rise in his cheeks, but he did not look away. "A feeling," he confirmed. "Now, how about some breakfast? You need to get your strength back if we are going to figure out how to keep you safe." Over the next few days, as Catherine slowly recovered from her ordeal in the cold, Tucker and she fell into an easy routine. He would wake early to tend to his animals and do the necessary chores around the ranch, while Catherine would rest by the fire and gradually regain her strength. In the afternoons, they would talk for hours, sharing stories of their lives and discovering that despite their different backgrounds, they had more in common than either had expected. Tucker learned that Catherine had always loved books and learning, that she had dreamed of becoming a teacher before her father had decided that marrying her off to a wealthy cattleman was a better use of her education. She spoke passionately about poetry and history, about the novels she had read in secret when her father thought she should be learning domestic skills. Tucker found himself captivated by her intelligence, by the way her eyes lit up when she talked about things that interested her. In turn, Tucker told Catherine about his life on the ranch, about the satisfaction of working with his hands and building something from nothing. He spoke of his parents, both long dead now, and of his younger sister who had married a shopkeeper in Denver and wrote to him occasionally with news of her growing family. He told her about his dead fiancée, Sarah, and how her death had nearly broken him before he found healing in the hard work of ranch life. "You still love her?" Catherine asked one evening as they sat by the fire, her voice gentle and curious rather than jealous. Tucker considered the question carefully. "I will always love the memory of who she was," he said finally, "but I have made my peace with losing her. Sarah would not have wanted me to spend my whole life mourning. She would have wanted me to be happy." "And are you?" Catherine asked. "Happy, I mean." Tucker looked at her, at the firelight dancing across her face, at the way she held her healing hands carefully in her lap, at the strength and vulnerability mixed in her expression, and he realized that his answer had changed sometime in the last few days. "I am starting to be," he admitted. Catherine blushed and looked down at her hands, but Tucker could see the pleased smile that curved her lips. Something was growing between them, something neither of them had expected but neither wanted to deny. It was too soon, Tucker knew that. They had barely known each other a week. But there was an intensity to their situation, a forced intimacy created by danger and proximity, and the simple fact that they only had each other to rely on, that accelerated everything. On the 7th day after Catherine had arrived, Tucker rode into South Pass City to gather supplies and, more importantly, information. He left Catherine with his rifle and strict instructions to bar the door and not answer for anyone but him. The town was bustling despite the cold, miners and ranchers and shopkeepers going about their business, and Tucker made his rounds carefully, listening to gossip and keeping his ear open for any news about Robert Mallory. What he heard was not encouraging. Mallory had put word out that he was offering a substantial reward for information leading to Catherine's return. He was telling anyone who would listen that his fiancée was disturbed and needed medical help, that she had run away in a fit of madness and might hurt herself or others. The sheriff, a man named Henderson who Tucker knew to be corrupt and easily bought, was helping Mallory search outlying ranches and farms. Tucker finished his shopping quickly and was loading supplies into his wagon when a familiar voice called his name. He turned to find Margaret Chen, the widow who ran the boarding house on the edge of town. Tucker had known Margaret for years and had always respected her shrewd intelligence and kind heart. "Tucker Quinn, I was hoping I might run into you," Margaret said, moving closer and lowering her voice. "I have heard some interesting rumors lately." Tucker kept his expression neutral. "Rumors," Margaret smiled slightly, "about a certain runaway bride and a certain rancher who might have helped her. Now, I am not one to spread gossip, but I wanted you to know that not everyone in town thinks Robert Mallory is the upstanding citizen he pretends to be. Some of us have heard stories about how he treats people, especially women. If someone was helping this mysterious bride stay hidden, well, I would say that person was doing God's work." Tucker studied Margaret carefully, trying to determine if this was a trap or genuine support. Margaret met his gaze steadily, and Tucker saw only sincerity in her dark eyes. "Hypothetically," Tucker said slowly, "if someone was helping this bride, what would you suggest they do?" "Hypothetically," Margaret replied, "I would suggest that this person needs to get the bride far away from here, somewhere Mallory cannot reach her. I have a cousin in Oregon who runs a dress shop in Portland. She is always looking for help, and she asks no questions about a woman's past. I could write a letter of introduction." Tucker felt a wave of relief so strong it nearly buckled his knees. "That is very generous, hypothetically speaking." Margaret reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. I took the liberty of writing that letter already, just in case. The next wagon train heading to Oregon leaves from Fort Bridger in 3 weeks. If your hypothetical friend could get there, my cousin would meet her on the other end. Tucker took the envelope with hands that were not quite steady. Why are you doing this? Because I was married to a cruel man once, Margaret said quietly. And when I finally got the courage to leave him, there was no one to help me. I had to do it all alone, and it nearly killed me. If I can help someone else avoid that fate, then I will. She patted Tucker's arm and stepped back. Be careful, Tucker. Mallory has got powerful friends. I will, Tucker promised. And thank you, Margaret, truly. Tucker drove his wagon home with his mind racing. 3 weeks until the wagon train left. 3 weeks to keep Catherine hidden and safe. 3 weeks to get her to Fort Bridger, which was a hard 2-day ride south from South Pass City. It was not ideal, but it was a plan, and a plan was more than they had before. When Tucker arrived back at the ranch, he found Catherine standing at the window, watching for him. The relief on her face when she saw him was almost painful in its intensity, and Tucker realized with a start that she had been genuinely afraid he might not come back, that he might have decided helping her was too much trouble. I am not going anywhere, Tucker said as he came through the door, reading her expression accurately. I told you I would help you, and I meant it. Catherine crossed the room in 3 quick steps and threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Tucker froze for a moment, surprised, and then his arms came up to hold her, to pull her close and keep her safe. She fit against him perfectly, he realized, as if she had been made to stand exactly there in the circle of his embrace. I was afraid, Catherine whispered against his coat. I was afraid Mallory had found you, or that you had decided I was too much trouble, or that something had happened. I have been standing at that window for hours, imagining every terrible possibility. Tucker carefully tipped her chin up so he could meet her eyes. I gave you my word, he said firmly. And I do not break my word, not for anything or anyone. You are stuck with me now, Catherine Graves, whether you like it or not. Catherine laughed, though there were tears on her cheeks. I think I can live with that. Tucker reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb, marveling at the softness of her skin, the warmth of her body pressed against his. I have got good news, he said, forcing himself to step back before he did something foolish like kiss her. There is a wagon train leaving for Oregon in 3 weeks. I've got a letter of introduction to a woman in Portland who will give you work and a fresh start. You will be far beyond Mallory's reach. Catherine's face lit up with hope, but then just as quickly fell. Oregon, that is so far away. That is the point, Tucker said gently. Mallory cannot hurt you if he cannot find you. But what about you? Catherine asked, her voice small. What about this, whatever this is between us? Are we just going to pretend it does not exist? Tucker felt his heart clench in his chest. They had not talked about the attraction that had been building between them, the way they found excuses to touch, the way their conversation stretched long into the night, the way they looked at each other when they thought the other was not watching. Tucker had been trying not to think about it, trying to focus on keeping Catherine safe rather than on the inconvenient fact that he was falling in love with her. I do not know, Tucker admitted. I have not thought that far ahead. I have just been focused on keeping you alive and free. Catherine stepped closer again, her green eyes searching his face. I need to know, Tucker. I need to know if this means something to you, if I mean something to you, or if you are just being kind to someone in trouble. Tucker knew that what he said next would matter more than almost anything he had ever said in his life. He could play it safe, could tell Catherine that he cared about her welfare but nothing more, could send her to Oregon and go back to his solitary life. Or he could tell her the truth and risk everything. You mean something, Tucker said, his voice rough with emotion. Catherine, you mean more than something. I know it is fast, too fast probably, but I cannot help how I feel. These past days with you have been the happiest I have had in years. You are brilliant and brave and beautiful. And when I think about you leaving, about never seeing you again, it feels like someone is reaching into my chest and tearing out my heart. Catherine's breath caught, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different tears. These were the tears of relief and joy and reciprocated feeling. I love you, she whispered. I know I should not. I know it is too soon and too complicated and probably crazy, but I love you, Tucker Quinn. You saved my life, and then you gave me a reason to be glad I was alive. Tucker closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, thumbs stroking over her cheekbones, wiping away tears as fast as they fell. I love you too, he said, and then he kissed her. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative and sweet, but it quickly deepened as 7 days of pent-up longing and denied attraction came flooding out. Catherine's arms went around Tucker's neck, and he pulled her flush against him, marveling at how right it felt, how perfectly they fit together. The kiss went on, each of them trying to pour everything they felt into the touch of lips, and the slide of tongues, and the desperate press of bodies seeking closeness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tucker rested his forehead against Catherine's and tried to catch his breath. So what do we do now? He asked. Catherine smiled, radiant and certain. You come with me to Oregon, or I stay here with you, or we go somewhere else entirely. I do not care where I am as long as I am with you. It would not be easy, Tucker warned. If you stay here or I go with you, Mallory will find out eventually. He will come after us. Then we will face him together, Catherine said simply. I am done running, Tucker. I am done letting my fear dictate my choices. I ran from Mallory, but I am not running from you. If you will have me, if you truly want this, then I am staying right here. Tucker thought about what that would mean, the challenges they would face, the danger they would be courting. But then he thought about the alternative, about sending Catherine away and spending the rest of his life alone, wondering what might have been if he had just been brave enough to reach for happiness when it was offered. The choice, when he really examined it, was not much of a choice at all. I want you to stay, Tucker said, but we need to do this properly. I will not have anyone saying I ruined you or took advantage. We will get married, legal and official, and then let Mallory or anyone else try to take you from me. Catherine laughed, bright and happy and free. Are you asking me to marry you, Tucker Quinn? I suppose I am, Tucker said, grinning like a fool. What do you say, Catherine Graves? Will you marry me? Yes, Catherine said without hesitation. Yes, absolutely yes. They kissed again, and this time it was a kiss of promise and commitment and hope for the future. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was setting outside the windows, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. We should get married soon, Tucker said practically. Before Mallory figures out where you are and tries to stop us. Catherine nodded. Tomorrow, Tucker agreed. I will ride into town first thing in the morning and talk to Reverend Thomas. He is a good man, and I think he will agree to marry us quickly if I explain the situation. They spent that evening making plans, talking about their future with the excited nervousness of people embarking on a great adventure. Tucker told Catherine about his dreams for expanding the ranch, about the horses he wanted to breed and the cattle he hoped to raise. Catherine spoke of her desire to start a small school for the children of ranch families who lived too far from town to attend regular school. They talked about building a life together, about the family they might have someday, about all the ordinary and extraordinary things that made up a marriage. That night, Tucker gave Catherine his bed again while he took the main room, but they both slept fitfully, too excited and anxious about the morning to rest deeply. Tucker was up before dawn, tending to his animals and preparing for the ride into town. Catherine was awake when he came back inside, dressed in one of Tucker's shirts, and a pair of his trousers rolled up at the ankles since her wedding dress was ruined, and she had no other clothes. "I will bring you back something to wear for the ceremony," Tucker promised, pulling on his heavy coat. "Margaret Chen at the boarding house will help. She is on our side." Catherine kissed him goodbye at the door, standing on tiptoe to reach his lips. "Be careful," she said, "and hurry back. I will be counting the minutes until you return." Tucker rode hard toward South Pass City, arriving just as the sun cleared the mountains and bathed the town in cold morning light. He went first to Reverend Thomas's small house behind the church, knocking loudly until the elderly minister opened the door in his nightshirt, blinking sleep from his eyes. "Tucker Quinn," Reverend Thomas said, surprise evident in his voice. "What brings you here at this ungodly hour?" "I need you to marry me today," Tucker said without preamble. "This afternoon if possible." Reverend Thomas's white eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "Today? That is very sudden. May I ask why the rush?" Tucker had prepared his answer on the ride into town. "I am in love with a woman who needs my protection. Her previous engagement was to a cruel man and she broke it off. Now he is hunting her, trying to force her back. If we are married, legally and properly, then he has no claim on her." Reverend Thomas studied Tucker's face for a long moment, his sharp old eyes missing nothing. "This would not happen to be the runaway bride that Robert Mallory has been tearing up the territory looking for, would it?" Tucker saw no point in lying. "It would." "I see," Reverend Thomas said slowly. "And this woman, she wants to marry you. She is not being coerced or forced. She wants to marry me," Tucker said firmly. "I love her, Reverend, and she loves me. I know it is fast and unusual, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Reverend Thomas was quiet for another moment, and then he nodded decisively. "Very well. I will marry you this afternoon, 2 o'clock in the church. But Tucker, you understand what you are taking on. Mallory is a powerful man with powerful friends. He will not take this well." "I know," Tucker said, "but some things are worth fighting for." "Indeed they are," Reverend Thomas agreed, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "Indeed they are. Now go make your preparations. I will see you at 2 o'clock. Tucker's next stop was the boarding house, where he found Margaret Chen already up and working in her kitchen. She listened to his request without interruption, and when he finished, she simply nodded and disappeared upstairs, returning a few minutes later with a beautiful dress of deep blue wool. "This was my wedding dress," Margaret said, pressing it into Tucker's hands. "I wore it when I married my second husband, the good one. It will need some adjustments, but I can bring it out to your place and help her get ready if you like." Tucker felt his throat tighten with gratitude. "You would do that, of course," Margaret said warmly. "Now tell me, what size shoes does she wear?" By the time Tucker left town an hour later, he had not only a dress but also shoes, stockings, a warm cloak, and several other pieces of clothing that Margaret had donated from her own wardrobe or purchased from the dry goods store. He also had Margaret's promise to arrive at his ranch by noon to help Catherine prepare. Tucker rode home with his heart pounding and his mind racing through everything that still needed to be done. When he arrived at the ranch, he found Catherine pacing anxiously by the window, and her face transformed with relief when she saw him. "It is all arranged," Tucker announced, grinning. 2 o'clock this afternoon in the church. Reverend Thomas will marry us." Catherine flew into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "This afternoon? That is so soon." "Too soon?" Tucker asked, suddenly worried. "No," Catherine said quickly. "Not too soon. Perfect, actually. I do not want to wait another moment longer than necessary to be your wife." Margaret arrived at noon as promised, bringing with her not only the dress, but also a basket full of food for a wedding breakfast, and an infectious enthusiasm that had both Tucker and Catherine laughing despite their nerves. She shooed Tucker out of his own house so she could help Catherine bathe and dress in private, and Tucker found himself relegated to the barn where he paced among his horses and tried not to think about all the things that could still go wrong. At 1:30, Tucker hitched up his wagon and brought it around to the front of the house. When Catherine emerged, his breath caught in his chest. The blue dress fit her perfectly, nipped in at the waist and falling in soft folds to the floor. Margaret had arranged her dark hair in an elegant style, woven through with small white flowers that she had somehow produced from her seemingly endless basket. Catherine looked beautiful and nervous and absolutely perfect. "You are stunning," Tucker said, his voice rough with emotion. Catherine blushed and smiled. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Tucker looked down at his best suit, the one he had not worn since Sarah's funeral 7 years ago. It was a little tight across the shoulders now, evidence of years of hard physical labor, but it would do for getting married in. The ride into town was tense despite Margaret's attempts at cheerful conversation. Tucker kept one hand on his rifle, his eyes constantly scanning the snowy landscape for any sign of Mallory or his men. But the road remained empty, and they arrived at the church without incident. Reverend Thomas was waiting for them inside the small wooden building, along with 2 witnesses he had recruited from among the more trustworthy members of his congregation. The ceremony was simple and quick, but no less meaningful for its brevity. Tucker spoke his vows in a clear, steady voice, promising to love and cherish Catherine for as long as they both lived. Catherine's voice shook slightly as she made her own promises, but her eyes never left Tucker's face, and the love shining there made Tucker's heart swell with almost painful intensity. When Reverend Thomas pronounced them man and wife, Tucker kissed his bride with a tenderness and passion that made Margaret sniffle happily, and the witnesses look away with embarrassed smiles. Catherine clung to him, kissing him back with everything she had, and for a moment the world narrowed down to just the 2 of them, newly married and impossibly happy. They were signing the marriage certificate when the church doors slammed open with a crash that echoed through the small building. Robert Mallory stood in the doorway, flanked by 4 men including Sheriff Henderson, and his face was twisted with rage. "Stop this immediately," Mallory roared, striding down the aisle toward them. "That woman is my fiancée, and I will not allow this farce to continue." Tucker stepped in front of Catherine, his body a shield between her and the advancing men. "The woman is my wife," he said coldly. "We just married, legal and proper. You have got no claim on her, Mallory." "Your wife," Mallory spat the words like they were poison. "She was promised to me. We had an agreement." "An agreement she did not consent to," Tucker shot back. "Catherine is a grown woman, not property to be bartered and sold. She chose to marry me, and there is nothing you can do about it." Sheriff Henderson stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun. "Now, Tucker, let's not be hasty. Mr. Mallory has raised some serious concerns about this young lady's mental state. Maybe we should all just calm down and discuss this rationally." "There is nothing to discuss," Reverend Thomas interjected, his voice carrying surprising authority for such an elderly man. "I have just performed a legal marriage ceremony. Tucker Quinn and Catherine Graves are now husband and wife, bound in the eyes of God and the law." Any objections Mr. Mallory might have had should have been raised before the ceremony, not after. Mallory's face turned an alarming shade of purple. "You married her to him, after everything I told you about her instability." I married two consenting adults who love each other, Reverend Thomas said calmly. That is my job, and I saw no evidence of any instability in Mrs. Quinn. She seemed perfectly lucid and certain of her decision. The emphasis on Mrs. Quinn was deliberate, and Tucker saw Mallory flinch as if he had been struck. For a moment, Tucker thought the cattleman might actually try to physically drag Catherine away, consequences be damned. But then Mallory seemed to get control of himself, his expression smoothing out into something cold and dangerous. "This is not over," Mallory said quietly, his eyes boring into Tucker's. "You have made a powerful enemy today, Quinn. I will make sure you regret stealing what is mine." "Catherine was never yours," Tucker replied, his voice just as quiet and twice as deadly. "And if you come near my wife again, if you threaten her or try to harm her in any way, I will make you regret it. That is not a threat, Mallory. It is a promise." For a long, tense moment, the two men stared at each other, and the air in the church felt charged with the potential for violence. But then Sheriff Henderson cleared his throat awkwardly and took Mallory's arm. "Come on now, Robert," the sheriff said, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "The marriage is done. Nothing we can do about it now. Let us just go." Mallory shook off the sheriff's hand but allowed himself to be guided back up the aisle toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. "You think you have won," he said to Tucker, "but this is far from over. Watch your back, Quinn. Watch it very carefully." Then he was gone, and the church fell silent except for the sound of horses riding away. Tucker felt Catherine trembling behind him and turned to pull her into his arms, holding her while she shook with reaction to the confrontation. "He is going to come after us," Catherine whispered against Tucker's chest. "He meant what he said. Robert never makes empty threats." "Let him come," Tucker said grimly. "We will be ready." Margaret had gone pale during the confrontation, but now she squared her shoulders and gathered up her things. "You two need to get back to your ranch quickly," she said. "And Tucker, you need to be prepared to defend your home." Mallory looked like a man who has lost all reason. Tucker nodded, his mind already racing through preparations. "We will leave now. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. And Reverend Thomas, I cannot thank you enough for what you did today." Reverend Thomas clasped Tucker's hand warmly. "You are a good man, Tucker Quinn, and you have married a brave woman. May God watch over you both in the difficult days ahead." The ride back to the ranch felt twice as long as the ride into town had been. Tucker pushed the horses as fast as he dared through the snow, constantly checking over his shoulder for signs of pursuit. Catherine sat beside him, still wearing her wedding dress, her face pale but determined. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Tucker immediately set about securing the property. He brought all his horses into the barn, stocked the house with extra ammunition, and checked every window and door to make sure they could be barred quickly if needed. Catherine helped where she could, and Tucker was grateful for her steady presence and calm demeanor despite the fear he could see lurking in her eyes. That night, their wedding night, they lay together in Tucker's bed and held each other close. Tucker kissed Catherine with all the love and passion and protectiveness he felt, and she responded with equal fervor, her hands clutching at his shoulders as if she could hold danger at bay through sheer force of will. "I am sorry your wedding day was ruined," Tucker murmured against her hair afterward as they lay tangled together in the darkness. "It was not ruined," Catherine said firmly. "I married the man I love. That is all I ever wanted. Everything else is just details." Tucker tightened his arms around her, marveling at her courage and resilience. "I love you, Mrs. Quinn." "I love you too," Catherine whispered back. "Whatever happens, whatever we have to face, we face it together." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Tucker slept more soundly than he had in weeks, comforted by the warmth of his wife beside him and the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it as a team. The attack came 3 days later, in the pre-dawn darkness when the world was still and cold. Tucker woke to the sound of breaking glass and the acrid smell of smoke. He was on his feet in an instant, pulling on his trousers and grabbing his rifle. "Catherine, wake up," he said urgently, shaking her shoulder. "Someone is attacking the house." Catherine sat up, instantly alert, her eyes wide in the darkness. "Mallory has to be," Tucker confirmed, moving to the bedroom window and carefully peering out. He could see shapes moving in the darkness, at least 4 men spreading out around the house. One of the barn windows was glowing orange with firelight. "They set the barn on fire," Tucker said, his voice tight with fury and fear. "They are trying to smoke us out or burn us to death." "What do we do?" Catherine asked, and Tucker heard the fear in her voice but also the determination not to give in to it. Tucker's mind raced through their options. They could stay in the house and hope the fire did not spread, but that was risky. They could try to make a run for it, but the men outside were waiting for exactly that. Or they could fight. "I am going to go out the back door and try to put out the fire in the barn," Tucker said, making his decision. "I need you to stay here, bar the door behind me, and shoot anyone who tries to come through a window." "Can you do that?" Catherine nodded, her jaw set with grim determination. "I can do that. But Tucker, please be careful. Please come back to me." Tucker kissed her hard and fast, pouring everything he felt into that brief contact. "I will. I promise." He moved through the house in a crouch, rifle in one hand and his revolver stuck in his waistband. At the back door, he paused to listen, trying to determine if anyone was waiting outside. The sound of crackling flames was louder now, and Tucker could see the orange glow reflecting off the snow through the kitchen window. His horses were in that barn, and his blood boiled at the thought of Mallory being willing to kill innocent animals just to get revenge. Tucker eased the door open and slipped out into the cold darkness. He moved quickly toward the barn, using the shadows for cover, his eyes constantly scanning for threats. He had almost reached the barn door when a figure stepped out from behind a stack of firewood, gun raised. "Going somewhere, Quinn." The man was one of Mallory's hired hands, the same one who had rested his hand on his gun during the confrontation at Tucker's door a week ago. Tucker did not hesitate. He brought his rifle up and fired in one smooth motion. The man went down with a cry, clutching his shoulder, and Tucker was already moving again, racing for the barn door. Inside, flames were eating through the hay and creeping up the wooden walls. Tucker's horses were screaming in panic, kicking at their stalls. Tucker threw open the stall doors one by one, slapping the horses on the rump to drive them out into the cold night air. They needed no encouragement, bolting for freedom as soon as they had the chance. Tucker was on the last horse when he heard footsteps behind him and spun around to find Robert Mallory standing in the barn doorway, his face demonic in the firelight. "You took everything from me," Mallory said, and his voice was eerily calm despite the madness in his eyes. "My bride, my reputation, my standing in the community. Now I am going to take everything from you." "Catherine was never yours to lose," Tucker said, keeping his rifle trained on Mallory's chest. "And if you had any sense at all, you would walk away right now before this ends badly for you." "Walk away?" Mallory laughed, high and unhinged. "No, I do not think so. I think instead I am going to kill you, and then I am going to take Catherine back to Cheyenne where she belongs. And if she gives me any trouble, well, accidents happen all the time." Tucker felt cold rage wash over him at the threat to Catherine. "You will have to go through me first." "I was hoping you would say that," Mallory said, and then he drew his gun. Tucker was faster. He fired, the crack of his rifle deafening in the enclosed space of the burning barn. Mallory staggered backward, a bloom of red spreading across his chest, shock written clearly on his face. He tried to raise his gun again, but his hand was shaking too badly. He fired wild, the bullet splintering wood somewhere to Tucker's left, and then he collapsed to his knees. "You shot me," Mallory said, as if he could not quite believe it. "You actually shot me." Tucker lowered his rifle, his hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I warned you. I told you what would happen if you threatened my wife." Mallory fell forward into the dirt and did not move again. Tucker stood over him for a moment, making sure he was truly down, and then he ran from the barn as the flames grew higher. Outside, he found the other men who had come with Mallory retreating on horseback, apparently having lost their appetite for the fight once their leader had fallen. Tucker ran back to the house and pounded on the door. "Catherine, it is me. Let me in." The door flew open and Catherine threw herself into his arms, sobbing with relief. "I heard shots. I thought you were dead. I thought he had killed you." "I am all right," Tucker said, holding her tight. "Mallory is dead and his men have scattered. It is over, Catherine. It is finally over." They stood in the doorway and watched the barn burn, knowing there was nothing they could do to save it now. The horses were safe. That was what mattered. The barn could be rebuilt. What could not be rebuilt was the life they would have lost if Mallory had succeeded. When Sheriff Henderson arrived an hour later, drawn by reports of gunfire and a fire visible from town, he found Tucker and Catherine sitting on the porch of the ranch house, wrapped in blankets and watching the smoldering remains of the barn. The wounded hired hand, still clutching his shoulder, was tied up and waiting for transport back to town. "Hell of a mess," Henderson said, surveying the scene with tired eyes. "Mallory is really dead." "He is," Tucker confirmed. "Self-defense. He and his men attacked my property, set fire to my barn, and tried to kill me and my wife. I did what I had to do." Henderson sighed heavily. "I figured it would come to something like this. Mallory had been spiraling for days, ever since you two got married. Half the town was expecting him to do something stupid." He looked at Tucker seriously. "You are going to have to answer some questions, come into town and give a statement. But between you and me, I do not think you will have any trouble. Too many people knew what kind of man Mallory really was, and too many people heard him threaten you at the church." Tucker nodded, exhausted down to his bones. "Tomorrow. We will come in tomorrow and tell you everything. But tonight, Sheriff, I just want to hold my wife and be grateful we are both still alive." Henderson looked at Catherine, taking in her pale face and the way she leaned against Tucker, and something like sympathy crossed his weathered features. "Tomorrow is fine. Get some rest, both of you. Lord knows you have earned it." After the sheriff left, taking the wounded man and Mallory's body with him, Tucker and Catherine went inside. They sat by the fire, not talking, just being together and processing everything that had happened. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Catherine finally spoke. "Is it really over?" she asked quietly. "Can we finally just live our lives?" Tucker pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "It is really over. Mallory is gone, and no one else has a claim on you. You are my wife, Catherine Quinn, and we can build whatever life we want now." Catherine looked up at him, her green eyes shining with tears and hope and love. "I want a life full of ordinary things. I want to wake up next to you every morning and go to sleep in your arms every night. I want to help you rebuild the barn and start that school I told you about. I want to have children with you and grow old watching them grow. I want the simple, beautiful life I never thought I could have." "Then that is what we will have," Tucker promised. "All of it and more. I will give you everything I can, Catherine. I will spend every day of my life making sure you know you are loved and safe and cherished." They kissed as the sun rose, a kiss of promise and commitment and hope for the future they would build together. The next few months were busy ones. Tucker rebuilt his barn with help from several neighboring ranchers who had heard about the attack and wanted to show their support. Catherine started her school in the main room of the ranch house, teaching the children of 3 nearby ranching families who were desperate for their kids to have an education. She proved to be a natural teacher, patient and creative, and genuinely delighted by her students' progress. In April, they received word that Catherine's father had died suddenly of a heart attack. Catherine grieved, but she did not regret her choices. She wrote to the lawyers handling his estate and made it clear that she wanted nothing from him, that she had built a new life and wanted no ties to her old one. The mercantile and all her father's holdings went to distant cousins, and Catherine felt nothing but relief that that chapter of her life was finally closed. By June, Catherine had confirmed what she had suspected for weeks. She was pregnant. Tucker received the news with such pure joy that Catherine found herself crying happy tears and laughing at the same time. He was going to be a father, and she was going to be a mother, and they were going to raise their child in a house full of love and safety, and all the things Catherine had dreamed of as a young girl. Their daughter was born on a snowy January evening, exactly 1 year and 1 week after Tucker had found Catherine half frozen in his barn loft. They named her Sarah Margaret, after Tucker's dead fiancée and the woman who had helped make their marriage possible. Margaret Chen cried when she heard, and she became the baby's unofficial grandmother, showing up regularly with gifts and advice and an endless supply of love. As Tucker held his newborn daughter in his arms, with his wife sleeping peacefully in their bed and the fire crackling warmly in the hearth, he marveled at how much his life had changed in 1 short year. He had gone from a lonely rancher, convinced he would spend his life alone, to a husband and father with more happiness than he had ever thought possible. "Thank you," he whispered to Catherine, who stirred and opened her eyes to smile at him. "For what?" she asked softly. "For stumbling into my barn that night, for trusting me, for choosing me, for giving me this life." Tucker looked down at his daughter's tiny face, at her perfect miniature features and the dark hair that reminded him so much of Catherine. "For giving me everything." Catherine reached out and took Tucker's free hand, lacing their fingers together. "You saved my life that night, Tucker Quinn, and then you gave me a reason to live it. I should be thanking you." "Then let us just say we saved each other," Tucker suggested with a smile. "I can live with that," Catherine agreed. Over the years that followed, their family grew. 2 more children came along, a boy they named Thomas and another girl they called Emma. The school Catherine had started expanded, eventually moving into a proper schoolhouse that the community built together on land Tucker donated. Their ranch prospered, becoming known throughout Wyoming for the quality of their horses and the character of their owners. People sometimes asked Catherine about her past, about how she had come to marry Tucker Quinn. She always told them the same story, that she had been lost in a blizzard and Tucker had saved her life, and that she had fallen in love with her rescuer. It was not the whole truth, but it was enough of the truth. The details of her flight from Robert Mallory, the violence of that final confrontation, the danger and fear and desperation of those early days, those were private memories that belonged to her and Tucker alone. On winter evenings, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Tucker and Catherine would sit by the fire and remember that first night. Tucker would take Catherine's hands in his, the hands he had warmed by this very fire when she was half frozen and more dead than alive, and he would marvel at how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Tucker asked one such evening, 10 years into their marriage. "Running from that wedding. ending up here with me instead of having the comfortable society life your father wanted for you." Catherine looked around the warm, cozy room, at the evidence of their life together scattered everywhere. The children's toys in the corner, the books she used for teaching stacked on the table, the photographs on the wall showing their growing family. She thought about the life she might have had if she had married Mallory, assuming she had survived it at all, and she shuddered. "Not for one single second," Catherine said firmly, moving to sit in Tucker's lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. "This life, this beautiful, ordinary, perfect life we have built together is everything I ever wanted. You are everything I ever wanted. I would run through 1,000 blizzards if it meant ending up here with you." Tucker kissed her then, slow and deep and full of 10 years of love and partnership and gratitude. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers and closed his eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the solid warmth of her body against his. "I love you, Catherine Quinn," he said softly. "I love you too, Tucker Quinn," she replied. "Today, tomorrow, and every day after that for the rest of our lives." Outside, snow began to fall again, just as it had been falling that night 10 years ago when Tucker had climbed into his barn loft and found a half-frozen bride who would change his life forever. But inside the ranch house, all was warmth and light and love, and Tucker and Catherine held each other close and counted themselves blessed beyond measure. Their children grew up strong and happy, never knowing want or fear, or the kind of desperation that had driven their mother into a blizzard all those years ago. Sarah became a teacher like her mother. Thomas took over the ranch from his father, and Emma surprised everyone by becoming a doctor, one of the first female physicians in Wyoming. All three credited their parents' loving marriage and unwavering support as the foundation that allowed them to pursue their dreams. Tucker and Catherine grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their hands becoming weathered and spotted with age but still fitting together perfectly when they walked. They buried Margaret Chen with honors when she died at the age of 92, and they planted a tree in her memory at the schoolhouse, a living reminder of the woman who had helped make their happiness possible. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Tucker, now 82, stood before the fire with Catherine, now 71, at his side, and he raised a glass to toast their marriage. "50 years ago today," Tucker said, his voice still strong despite his age, "I married the bravest, most beautiful woman I had ever met. She had come into my life like a storm, unexpected and impossible to ignore, and she changed everything. Catherine, you made me believe in second chances. You gave me a family and a purpose, and more love than any man deserves. These 50 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life." Catherine wiped away tears and stood on tiptoe to kiss her husband, just as she had kissed him 50 years ago in that little church in South Pass City. The room erupted in applause and laughter, and their grandchildren clamored for the story of how Grandma and Grandpa had met. Tucker and Catherine exchanged a look, a whole conversation passing between them in that single glance. Then Catherine smiled and began the story the way she always did. "It was a cold winter night, and I was lost in a terrible blizzard," she said, settling into her chair with several grandchildren clustered around her feet. "I thought I was going to die, but then I found a barn, and in that barn was the man who would save my life in more ways than one." Tucker picked up the story from there, describing how he had found Catherine in his loft, how he had warmed her frozen hands by the fire, how he had known even then that she was someone special. They told the sanitized version of the story, the one suitable for children, but their eyes met across the room again and again, remembering the parts they left out. The danger, the fear, the desperate flight from a cruel man, the violence that had nearly destroyed them both. But they also remembered the love, the fierce protective devotion that had sprung up between them almost from the first moment. They remembered the choice to fight for each other, to build a life together despite all the obstacles in their path. They remembered learning each other's bodies and hearts, discovering that perfect partnership that made them stronger together than either could ever be alone. As the party wound down and their family began to depart, promising to visit again soon, Tucker and Catherine found themselves alone by the fire once more. Tucker carefully lowered himself into his chair, his joints not what they used to be, and Catherine settled onto his lap just as she had done countless times over the past 50 years. "We did all right, did we not?" Tucker asked, looking around the home they had built, thinking of the family they had raised, the life they had created from that desperate beginning. "We did better than all right," Catherine said, pressing a kiss to his weathered cheek. "We did magnificently." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance and crackle, both of them remembering that long-ago night when Catherine had been half frozen and Tucker had warmed her hands by a fire just like this one. It seemed impossible that it had been 50 years ago, and yet in another way it seemed like just yesterday. Time was strange like that, Catherine thought. The important moments, the ones that changed everything, they stayed vivid and fresh no matter how many years passed. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I had not found you that night?" Tucker asked quietly. "If I had not gone up to the loft, or if I had gone an hour later?" Catherine shuddered at the thought. "I try not to. I came so close to dying that night, Tucker, but you found me. You saved me, and then you loved me. That is what matters." "I will always love you," Tucker promised, the same promise he had made 50 years ago, the same promise he had kept every single day since, until my last breath and beyond. "And I will always love you," Catherine replied, tears streaming down her face. "You are my rescuer, my husband, my partner, my best friend. You are everything." They kissed again, soft and sweet, a kiss between two people who had spent a lifetime learning every detail of each other, who knew each other's souls as well as their own. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled around the ranch house, but inside, all was warm and safe and full of love. When Tucker and Catherine finally passed away, within 6 months of each other, as if neither could bear to be long without the other, they were buried side by side in the South Pass City Cemetery. Their headstone bore their names, their dates, and a simple inscription chosen by their children. Together from the moment he warmed her frozen hands by the fire, together for all eternity. Their great-great-grandchildren would tell the story of Tucker and Catherine Quinn for generations to come. The tale of the cowboy who found a runaway bride half frozen in his barn loft and chose to protect her, to marry her, to build a life with her. It became a family legend, polished and refined with each telling, but always true in the ways that mattered. It was a story about courage and choice, about recognizing love when it appeared in unexpected places, about fighting for happiness even when the odds seemed impossible. It was a story about two people who found each other in the darkest moment and chose to make a life full of light. But most of all, it was a love story, pure and simple. The kind of love story that people dream about but rarely find, the kind that changes everything and lasts forever. The kind of love that begins with a simple act of kindness, warming frozen hands by a fire, and grows into something so powerful and enduring that it echoes through the generations. Tucker and Catherine Quinn lived a long, happy life together. They faced challenges and hardships, as all couples do, but they faced them together, united in their love and commitment to each other. They built a family, a home, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And it all started on a cold December night in 1875, when a desperate woman fled into a blizzard, and a lonely rancher found her half frozen in his barn loft. He warmed her hands by the fire. She gave him her heart, and together they built a love story for the ages.